Hi, I'm Stephen Moss, and I will be presenting on critical discourse analysis. The book that I read for this presentation is entitled Critical Discourse Analysis Critical Analysis of Language by Dr. Norman Fairclough. Dr. Fairclough is an emeritus professor of linguistics at the Department of Linguistics and English Language at Lancaster University in England, and he's known for developing critical discourse analysis, or CDA. CDA explores the ways in which language and discourse contribute to the development and maintenance of social power relations, ideologies, and identities. Fairclough's approach integrates linguistics with social theory, and it is a formidable tool for looking at how discourse shapes social structures. CDA has a rich tradition, and there are many disciplines that have contributed to the development of critical discourse analysis, including critical social research, which looks at society and aims to go beneath the surface and critically engage and challenge prevailing ideas and concepts of social relations. Marxism is also an important influence, specifically dialectal materialism, which is one of the central tenets of Marxism. And this idea or this approach posits that reality is defined through material forces rather than ideas or spiritual forces. Other influences include critical theory, specifically the ideas from the Frankfurt School. And these ideas examine the effect of businesses and monopolies and the effects of capitalism on society and human life, with the goal of critiquing and trying to find ways to transform society by examining these power structures and ideologies with a view toward emancipation and social justice. Other influential theories include queer theory, which critiques society's definitions of gender and sexuality, feminist theory, which looks at systemic causes and effects of inequalities among the sexes, and how issues such as class, sexuality, and race affects these inequalities. Other ideas include post-colonial theory, which looks at specifically the impact of European colonial rule around the world and accounting for their influence in the 18th through the 20th century. In terms of some of the epistemological and ontological influences or assumptions that inform critical discourse analysis, CDA is entrenched in a realist approach in which there is a real world, including the social world, and the real world exists independent of how well we know or understand it. Specifically, CDA takes a critical realist approach, which means that in terms of the social world that exists, it depends on human action for its existence and is in a sense socially constructed, which brings us to the idea of social constructivism. And this idea just simply states that knowledge is socially constructed and that people develop their understanding of the world and society through interaction with others and their environment, rather than there being some like objective truth that exists independently out there. In terms of discourse, the book and the writer defines discourse as a complex set of relations, including communications between people who talk and people who write and exchange ideas with each other. Discourse is also defined in terms of the relations between specific concrete events and more kind of abstract, enduring conversations that happen over a longer period of time and across languages and genres. There are lots of key terms in the book. Some of these key terms, honestly, I had heard for the first time. I had never heard some of these terms before. As it relates to ideologies, I'm familiar with that term. The author, Fairclough, looks at ideology in terms of the meaning that's being made in service to power structures. So, specifically, ideologies that serve power and that interact with power structures in society. In terms of these ideological discursive formations, these are kind of broader ideas. These are kind of ideas that are created and have impact in society, broader impact in society. In terms of moments, these are specific time periods or specific events that make discourse on that particular issue very visible in society. And it causes stakeholders and people who are kind of familiar with that discourse to reframe or rethink their positions. And it also looks at how these conversations or discourses kind of evolve over time in relation to these specific events in society. When we look at interdiscursivity, this is kind of the mixing of different discourses and styles. So, looking at institutional conversations and social interactions, but thinking about them kind of together in terms of in isolation. Semiosis, I hope I pronounced that correctly. It looks at meaning making through not just language, but also body language and visual images, so pictures, or really any other kind of system of communication. And it looks at how semiosis is used to analyze how, again, power and ideology are embedded in discourse. So, how power interacts with discourse, how they relate to each other in society. Looking at examples, one of the central things that this book focuses on is power. Critical discourse analysis really looks at the way discourse interacts with power. And so, whereas power and discourse are related, they overlap. Um, they are not necessarily discrete in a sense. So they work together. Power and discourse work together. They are different elements in society, but they work off of each other. They flow into each other. So they're different ideas. Discourse looking at conversation and talk, power looking at these structures and hierarchies in society, and and power influences discourse and discourse influences power. So they work together in terms of how discourse flows in society. In terms of questions that qualitative researchers could ask in studies, two came to mind as I looked through the book. Critical discourse analysis can ask questions about how hidden ideologies, for example, in society, um, play a role. So how does critical discourse analysis play a role in helping to kind of make those hidden ideologies more plain and scrutinizing the role of power in those interactions? Another thing that another question that could be asked by qualitative researchers, they could examine the emergence of different strategies for overcoming crises, for example, and looking at ways in which discourse happens around crises, and looking at ways also that discourse can be used to transform those systems and structures. In terms of challenges or limitations of the approach, there are issues related to what's called translation. And basically, as you bring different ideas and different thoughts and theories and frameworks together, you can have trouble in terms of being able to relate them. In terms of how, for example, power and discourse, you can see how discourse and conversation influences power, and how power discourse is used by powerful people, for example, to have conversation. In terms of translation, whereas we can see the relationship between power and discourse, for some ideas it's not so easy to see how they flow into each other and how they relate to each other. So there's the issue of translation there. Another thing that could be a limitation is finding ways to coherently connect categories and relationships in terms of theories of discourse. And last but not least, the ability to actually analyze these dialectical or kind of conversational relationships between discourse and power for particular topics or particular types of research. And that ends my conversation on critical discourse analysis. Thank you guys for listening. Have a great day.